All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I'm going to do another live stream coding session for Simply Test Me. Did one last week and it got some good feedback, and I want to keep this momentum going so we can work on the new iteration of Simply Test Me. Again, for those who do not know about Simply Test Me, Simply Test Me is a way to launch Drupal sandbox sites. And this is the current version, which is built on Drupal 7. And, we're porting it to Drupal 9 to give it a few more extra features and make it a little bit more maintainable. And I've been working on that over the past 2 months or so. But one of the first things I wanted to go through is show my local environment that I've set up. Hearing an echo. Is the echo gone? So I don't know where the echo could be coming from. All right. So one of the things I've been working on while doing this development is setting up a sorry. So one of the things that needs to be worked on is having a local development environment. And I have set that up with a custom composer template here that anyone can then do a git clone of and run composer install and have a way to work on Simply Test for contribution. So you're able to just clone this, run composer install, and also just do, it has a custom ddev command. So it is running with ddev. You can run it with Lando or whatever way you would like to, or however you run your local Drupal sites. I use ddev, so I added some wrappers in there. So you can run, just do ddev si, and that will install the site for you. And then I made a shortcut composer script for running the test because there is test coverage. I will continue working on scaffolding this out so that way more folks can use it and try to contribute. But this is a start, so we can get more users onboarded for contributing. Okay. So today, I just wanted to highlight that first. Today, I'll be working on. There's 3 issues I want to touch on. One is this patch. Okay, so it was on your end. It's been so long, trying to get my audio figured out, and I knew it was quiet and had me nervous there that I broke something. So I want to go through this patch that was submitted by some contributors. Currently there's a permission for submitting Simply Test requests, and we just want to remove that because anybody should be able to do a build. So I want to test this out, went back and forth with several contributors, and I think we now have a patch that can be run. I'm just going to apply it locally and we'll give it a test. I want to work on getting the local cache of Drupal core releases added, because right now the front end has to query the Drupal.org API to know what versions of core are available, and that's something we shouldn't have to do. We have that cached in the system, so it's a little bit faster to retrieve. And then after last week, I accidentally got some bad JavaScript committed because I added debugging code and I forgot to recompile the JavaScript ahead of time before committing. And there's a tool called Husky. I believe this is used in the JavaScript community to add Git hooks to your projects. There's one for the PHP community that's a version of Husky for Composer. But the main thing is it's intended to just, whenever you install your project, it installs the Git hook. All of your teams can use Git hooks. Because when you clone a repo, all of your Git hooks are scripts inside the .git repo, and that doesn't come with the code when you copy it over. So you need tooling like this to ensure that everybody runs the same scripts. So this would be a contributor experience as well. So that way, as we're working with React and JavaScript that has to be compiled, folks don't forget to do that, and hopefully everybody has a happier experience. All right, so I'm going to get started with this patch. Since it is using the, we'll say, legacy flow of having a patch file and not a fork, I'm going to copy the link address and let's go ahead and apply it. So do curl. This is my shortcut for applying patches. I know many know about this, some may not. So I just use curl, because when you do curl standalone, it gets the contents of the request, and then you're able to pipe it to get apply, and oh, it does not apply. Joy. Oh, because we removed some of these routes. So I'm just going to manually recreate it, and we'll make sure that they get attributed to it properly. So it should be, it's a pretty easy. So we're going to search for all these instances and replace it with access. This is one thing I do like about PHP Storm. Well, any of the IntelliJ IDEs actually, is when you do a search, you're able to edit the file in place for where you found the item. So I'm able to just do like a manual find and replace, if you will, without having to deal with opening each file on its own. All right. Access true. That. And we'll remove it here as well. And then we're going to find out what defines it and remove that permission. Since it's no longer needed, we'll hit refresh and no occurrences found. Perfect. The permission's defined somewhere. Here we go. In this file. So I like to copy the file name and I double tap shift and then I'll paste it in, and it lets me go directly to the file. And we're going to delete the submit simply test request permission. And there we go. I guess while we're at it, I'm just going to create the issue fork. And we'll say needs work, does not apply, needs reroll. Create an issue fork with the reroll. If we want to get really specific with it, we could add the tag for needs reroll, but that's just kind of mundane for right now, for the fact that I'm here and I'm just going to finish it. All right, so did we create the issue forks created? I'm going to go ahead and open the merge request. I'm going to copy the get instructions and then check out that branch real quick. I should test it before going through with it. So I am logged out on this site right now. Open DevTools. Let me go to my sites. All right, so I'm going to remove that permission from my roles. And we'll do ddev drush cim. So I'm going to re-import my config, which will delete the permission from those roles. And then I'll do a drush cache rebuild to rebuild the routes, so that way Drupal knows that permission is not required for those routes anymore. And if it works, it works. Oh. One second. My config's out of date because I have not been keeping it. We've done some cleanup, so these two modules don't exist. Oh, sorry. So ddev. I realized I just said that, hey, it uses ddev, and I expected everybody to know what ddev is. So I've been using Docker for local development for 6-7 years now. I was always a Vagrant user, but then I ran out of disk space. So I used Docker, and I used Docker and Docker Compose. This is back when like boot to Docker was a thing. Um, oh, why not Lando? I have reasons. Um, so DDEV is a Docker wrapper, and I like DDEV because I feel it is more friendly and works better with my system. I unfortunately had to use Lando for a project, and in my so I'll say unfortunately for this reason. One, I installed Lando a year ago, and it deleted my Docker install because I didn't realize that the installer would install its own version of Docker. Secondly, on Mac, we all know that Docker for Mac has disk I/O performance issues. So what I used to do is under file sharing, I would restrict my path to only paths that use Docker, such as, like all my Drupal sites are in slash Drupal. All of my client work is in slash clients. And that improved disk performance. DDEV needs the .ddev folder and nothing else. So I had just my 3 folders that Docker would mount, and everything was happy fine. But then I had to use a project with Lando, and Lando requires your entire home directory. And now my disk performance is back down with Docker for Mac. In my experience, just when I have a Lando project running, my battery just dies. When I have my DDEV projects running, it's okay. It's completely anecdotal. I don't know if it's because all of my Lando setups have been using the Pantheon recipe, so there's more things running. But I do believe that the mounts inside Lando are in performance. But at the same time, Lando, I feel, is meant for the more generic user. And those who use DDEV can be generic too, but are usually people that seem to be more comfortable with Docker. Like, it's a good light layer around managing Docker Compose. I know Lando lets you do things, but personally, I do not like Lando. So I use DDEV. All right. So my config imported, we got rid of those roles. I'll do DDEV drush CR. But I do want to say, like, I fully appreciate what Lando has done. Just like Drud or DDEV, Lando have tried to build companies around local development tooling. And local development tooling is a big problem, and it's exciting to see people work on it. Yes, they're doing the same thing. They're basically, instead of you writing Docker Compose, they do Docker Compose and tooling. There's Lando, there's DDEV, there's Doxel, there's Wadby, there's different ones. I had my own before. I had my own called Platform Docker that I built for working with platform.sh, because that's where I usually host my projects. And then I deprecated that for DDEV because I found DDEV, it basically fit what I was doing, and it was an excuse for me to learn Golang so I could contribute. But yeah, in the end, they're doing the same thing. So whatever is comfortable for you to work with, which, that's the point of the tooling, is to just make your life simpler. So pick the one that fits best for you. Good question. Thanks for bringing it up. I'm going to refresh this, and we're going to basically make sure that I can make another request without the permissions. So this local cache, this request right here is what we're talking about. Even though it gets cached in the CDN, after a while that expires. So it takes about 2 seconds to get all the core release history. But if I were to refresh it, it's much faster the second time around. But if we can get that cached into the system, it will just be fast. All right. So I click launch project. We have the Drupal version, project data here, and it redirected. Okay. So without that permission, everything worked just fine. So I'm going to status, let's do git commit AV, remove the old request permission. We'll push that up. And if I refresh, it should show that there was the commit. Okay, there's the that. There's the commit. And I'll just kick it to RTBC. Now, I know I've actually had some people go like, you wrote the patch and the commit and you put it to RTBC. I mean, if this was Drupal core, I wouldn't do that. But for some of these smaller modules, it's like, we know it worked. It doesn't need review again. Like, I don't see any reason to postpone this patch saying, well, I need to make sure somebody else reviews it when I just re-rolled the patch and we know it works. Use best judgment also. Like, I've been working on this project a lot and Adam knows that I do my due diligence. So there's some respect there. So just be wary of it. Like, don't go into a module you never contributed to and just like, well, I'm just going to say everything's RTBC. Garner some trust and, know the maintainer a bit before you do just jump that. But in this case, it makes complete sense too. Rerolled merge request and ready to go. I don't know if I can save any changes. No, I can't. It's not only the maintainer can do that. All right, so good. That's a little bit of housekeeping done. On to the fun one. All right. We're going to get this Drupal core selector thing in cache, and I have a few ideas on how I want to do this. Look, there's the site. Let's go back though to simply test, and we can close that. So one idea I have is, I think we'll just create a table that stores the release version, the major, minor, patch. I actually have no idea what extra means. I'm assuming extra is if you get RC, beta, or alpha, and then we get the VCS label, which is usually always the release version. So what I'll do is we're going to do a new, to start, we're going to do a new HTTP request. Just do add a GET request here. And let's copy that URL. So release major, let's see, release major would be 7. So let's just pick 9. Let's go with something slow, low, except. Well, let's break down all the query parameters here first. So we are going to the Drupal.org API, and to get nodes, you go to node.json, unless you're saying, you say accept application.json, then you can usually drop this, but then some of the links get created and it's not exactly perfect. So I always just keep the .json to be safe. Type project release, that is the node type of project release. We have the field. For those who didn't know this, the node ID for Drupal core is 3060. We're saying we want a limit of 100 and we want to sort it by minor version, descending. So that way we get the newer releases first. And we're going to target the major version of 9. And we'll run that. And I just want to show, if you do want to explore the Drupal.org API, you just go to Drupal.org/API. And it will give you all the documentation for running that. This has actually been around for a while. I can't recall how long, but it is what powers Contrib Kanban is this API. Right. So we've got our response. And what I'm curious about right now is I know some of this data. So here we have the unsupported development snapshot. That's the description of it. I think if I open it in here, we'll get something I can expand and collapse. So dev. So here we go. Okay, so extra is the identifier if it is a dev, RC, or beta. Will show up in there. One thing that I want to check out that we need to make note of, I'm going to just going to add notes to the Drupal.org issue. This is dev, alpha, beta, RC, right? And that's just, yep, RC2. Release update status. I'm not sure what that means. But one thing I want to look for is security. If there's a way that we can I thought there's a way that you can identify if something was a security release or not. Because then we could filter out, we could prevent all the versions of Drupal core that are insecure from being leveraged. Field release update status is 0. Well, let's look at one that's 2. All right. This is the URL. So let's just see what that 2 might represent. So there is a flag for insecure. Oh. So it's taxonomy term vocabulary 7. So if we look at vocabulary 7, I wonder if that's what this is here. So we'll go to the API URL, this node ID, description, security team only. This specific release is insecure due to our future version being a security release. All right, there we go. So if a release has taxonomy, term ID, blah, it is an insecure release. So we could use that to filter out the releases as we see them. And I think this is a good start. One thing I also wanted to check is some of our headers. So this says Drupal cache miss, when it expires, and the cache control, and the max age. So yeah, here the max age, that's 900 seconds. So that lives only for 15 minutes, and that's one reason the request goes on longer. Mind simple fit test has supported version that would currently be 7. Yes. The main thing I'm looking at here is for if to ignore insecure versions of major core. If so, we can flag that and just keep that data and decide if something should or should not be used. One thing we can copy is this last modified. And if we use the last modified header, we can do a head request and see if it's been modified or not, or I guess in options, and see if we should even fetch it again. But we'll start with creating a table that has, I'm going to make a comment. So we're going to create a table that has the major, minor, patch, extra, not the delta, the VCS label, and also if it's insecure or not. And we can store the data and then figure out what to do with it, like in the long run. Like we don't need to say, oh, well, it's insecure, so we won't cache it. But this way we at least know and we can decide. Such as like the last core release involved patching archive tar. From the archive tar, because you could exploit like an uploaded archive. That's something that'd be like, okay, we definitely can't allow any previous versions of core because of this. Or if we do, we have to add a patch build step to apply the patches to versions of Drupal core. I'm not sure what that would exactly look like, but this is what this would enable. So I'm going to create the issue fork so we can get started on some work. And I'm hoping that this will be a fun walkthrough and doing some test-driven development and other goodies. and how I like to tackle handling with remote data. Copy that. All right. So let's see. We'll go into profiles, contrib. We're going to put this into the, not tugboat, into the projects table. Our projects module. First, I'm going to make sure we have our tests. And we'll need these to be a kernel test since we're going to be interacting with the database. We'll be interacting with the database here. So what we'll do, we have project fetcher. We're going to call it Drupal core version fetcher. Why not? Names are hard, but they're not permanent. So it works for now. So namespace, simply test projects. All right. So let's see, this won't really return anything. The idea is just to fetch the data and put it into the database, which can make it kind of hard to test because you're just running it and then verifying it puts stuff into a table. But we're just going to roll with it right now. So we'll create a process function. And let's see, this is going to need the database and a the client factory. So we'll do connection. What is it? Client factory. Why is this? Oh, import that class, and then we'll do. So the client factory lets you get an HTTP client from the service. And one thing I've seen a lot of folks do is they'll do this client equals client factory from options. I like to avoid any extra work in my constructor because you don't know when this service could be instantiated and not used. I've had some performance issues where you have a bunch of logic in the constructor to construct, and it wasn't even using that request, which is a huge performance. So usually what I'll end up doing is a private function get client, and this would do like private client if this client is equal to null, this client equals this client factory from options. And one reason I like to do the client factory is so that way I can set things like the base URI when they're reused, but this actually is just over engineering it since we will only be calling one API, not multiple different ones, and only one request. So we're just going to call this client, and we'll change this to client interface, and we'll just take the default one that the Drupal service container is to us. So I'm going to go ahead and define this in here. So we've got simply test projects.Drupal core version fetcher. This is a horrible name, but I can't think of something better right now. And I can't remember if I showed this in a previous live stream, but by having the PHP Storm with Symfony and Drupal Bridge plugin, I'm able to click on this here and then define the Symfony YAML argument. And it reads the constructor from my class and maps it to the known services. So I just click generate, and it gave me the arguments for my service, so I don't need to type anything. So if you're on the fence for paying for PHP Storm, it's these little things that save you a lot of time in the long run that make you more productive. So it pays for itself, as I say. All right, so we've got the core version fetcher. So what we should do is, I'm not sure what we should do. So we'll start with just doing a request. So the URL, let's see, we'll start with supported versions. I'll answer that question in 1 second. So we're going to do supported major versions equals 7, 8, 9. So one reason that I use Brave is Chrome has become like my work browser, where I have all my my Bluehorn Digital email logged in, and any other client Gmail or whatever else. Like I use Chrome in different profiles for work. Brave, because I've been using the tipping function a bit. Well, I can't demonstrate it because it says my wallet has been disconnected. But I've been interested in a lot of the Web3 things where you have your Ethereum wallet tapped into the DApps, distributed apps, and a few things like that. So I like Brave because it's Chromium, but not raw Chromium. So I enjoy it. And also for the Brave is all about, their shields. I have them down for Drupal.org, but otherwise it blocks a lot of the tracking and ad stuff. But I've come to really enjoy it. So what we're going to do is, sorry, this architecture just feels really gross right now. But I'm going to worry about that later, and we'll make it pretty after the fact. Because really this is something that on Hook Cron we say go check if there's new releases, and then this should say for what major version it's going to run with, but we can always refactor and make it better in the long run. So we're going to take this URL and for each supported major versions as major version, URL is that there. So then we would do this. We would do response equals this client. Hold on. It's typed to client interface when we actually want it to say the concrete class, so that way we get the property definitions. Oh, I know. One thing I do want to go back to is before I was going to do the client factory, but there's actually just HTTP client. So let's go look at that definition here. So there is the HTTP client, which calls the factory and from options. So whenever you fetch the class, whenever you fetch HTTP client, it's just getting a generic HTTP client from the factory, which doesn't let you configure into the base options. So usually when I do this, I do from options so I can set the base URL and any default headers. So that way, every time I make a request, I don't need to reset what headers are available or being sent with the request. So it's kind of just how I prefer to work with Guzzle. So we're going to do for each major version, we'll do that. And then we'll do data equals JSON decode. I always cast the response body to a string when I do this, because body is a stream, which means that it has to be rewound. And usually when you receive this, it's already at the beginning of the stream. But by casting it to a string, it will, let's see if I can just show you real quick. response. No, it's not going. It's going to be way too hard to do that. But when you cast it to a string, it will automatically do a rewind and print it to a string. And I want to start doing some live debugging on this as I work through it. So let's generate a drush command. And I think it's just drush ddev drush generate. Let's see what the command is. And I'm generating a drush command because then we could call this via drush to execute and fetch, because maybe we don't need this on a cron, right? That could be kind of overkill because there's only releases every so like there's releases on a period. So it's something we can just say like, great, we've got a drush command. Core had some releases, run the command on ourselves. Generate drush command file. There we go. And by having a drush command, I can then turn on xdebug and just step through this with xdebug to see the data and figure out how I want this to go. Module machine name is simply test projects. We're not porting from a legacy. Boom, there we go. It's actually not too hard to do. Just like Drupal console was, it defines a drush services.yaml and gives you the commands. It requires you to have a composer.json, something with the discovery. It looks, I don't know, I haven't looked into it, but it reads every extension for a composer.json that defines extra drush services instead of just discovering the drush.services.yaml file. I don't know the decisions behind it, but that's just what you have to do. You need a composer.json that points to the drush services. I guess it does make sense here. I'm assuming this is a version constraint. So if you had commands that only worked for drush 9, you could say drush 9 services.yaml. And I'm assuming that's it. I've never actually looked much into it. So we're going to go into commands. This is a generic file right now. What we do need to do is add an argument for our service of simply test projects Drupal core version fetcher. Now we'll go back to our commands file and we'll start building this out. Core version fetcher. And then you work with this just like you would a regular service feed class that's defined as a service. Drupal core version fetcher. Oh, I'm gonna hate calling it that all the time. All right, so we got the construct, but why is it yelling at me? Oh, because it's probably missing construct call because it exists. We'll just call it, even though it doesn't do anything. All right, so do that. We're gonna delete all this generated stuff here. We'll leave this first one. So command is simply test. We'll do simply test : projects. We'll call it core versions fetch. We'll leave, we'll keep the argument and we'll call it version. So we have no options, but we will have the version argument, which is an integer, but it probably gets passed as a string from the command line. So we'll call it string. We'll type into the string. Usage. We don't need usage for now. fetches versions for a major version of Drupal core. So what we'll do in this command then is this is called process. But what we're going to do is change this to receive the version, and we'll add a string version parameter. We'll wrap these as strings as well. And I'll do if not in array version supported core versions. We're going to do throw new invalid argument exception. The major version is not supported. All right. So that's that there. Copy, close. Now we'll get started. So we'll do, I'm just going to get into the web container. We'll do drush, do a cache rebuild. Since it is services, you do actually have to do a cache rebuild to rediscover those new commands. And if I did drush and grep for simply test, we should now see our command present. Okay, perfect. So we see it there. Let's turn on Xdebug. Oh, and this is to go back to the whole Lando thing. I like with ddev, I can just type enable Xdebug and I get Xdebug, or I could type disable Xdebug and I get Xdebug disabled, and not have to do edit a config file and then rebuild my project, which takes like 2 minutes to do. I like to be very efficient in my work, and having to wait 2 minutes for something to rebuild so I can turn something on or off, like, destroys me inside. Again, that's why it comes down to personal preference. I don't like having to wait that long just to turn on Xdebug, or if I want to enable Blackfire or something like that. Like, I don't want to wait that long for all the containers to spin down and up when it doesn't need to. You just need to restart FPM inside the app server. Which, to that note, I do plan on trying to contribute some things to Lando now that I have to use it, because if I don't like it, well, I have the opportunity to try to fix some of those things if the maintainers accept those contributions. So we have Xdebug enabled. I'm going to turn on the listener, and we'll run that command and do some Xdebug over the command line. Oh, you know what? I'm going to just avoid that annoyingness, I'm going to call drush directly with PHP. So that way it doesn't complain about the path mapping, because when I type just drush, it's using the drush global launcher, which isn't mapped to the project. And I forgot a version number, so we'll do 9. And we'll see. All right, so it came through. Oh, we should not keep this for each every major version. Close that, because we're actually passing one now. So version, there we go. All right, let's run it. And we're going to step through and just basically get our data ready to be able to put it into a table. So the URL, pens 9, great. We get the response and the data. So there is a first, last, and there is no next. So this is one thing that we need to look at, is some of these will have pagination because there's so many releases. So we know that has next page equals is set data next. We'll know that. Releases equals data list. And what we can actually do, I will answer that question in 1 second. So what we're going to do is we will do, so we're going to have releases equal this. No, sorry, I'm trying to get ahead of myself and be smarter about pagination, but we'll deal with that when we get to it. So releases is data list. And I'll take a quick, Raphael, so sorry for an unrelated question. Is it safe to rebuild the cache in production without maintenance mode? Sometimes it is not regenerated properly and miss some fields. So I've never run cache rebuild with maintenance mode on. Now, if you have a lot of fields, I could see where things get weird. I've never had that happen, but I actually never run cache rebuild in production because I feel like you shouldn't have to. Now, but Matt, how do you do deployments? Let me just, so one thing that I always do with my settings is, and you know what, you're kind of stuck if you can do this or not, if your platform or host lets you do it. So what I always do is I ensure that my deployment identifier is a value that's not the default of Drupal version. If you haven't seen this before, it's used in the Drupal kernel. It's the cache key. So every time you deploy to your Drupal site, it looks up the service container in a cache. If you change that identifier to be something else, like the git hash or anything else, it will cause a cache miss on the container and cause the container to get rebuilt. And that can also cause a lot of different plugin managers to be invalidated. But this doesn't always get you the whole way, such as some, like you might need to blow away the theme registry because it is cached. So what I always end up doing is, do I have an update? Well, we'll just open a Scratch file. So what I always do is I will call composer cache, and I will invalidate the tags I know I need, or I will find the service. So get container, get theme registry. What is it? Maybe there. But I will look up what tags are required to clear that cache. So if I go to the theme registry, cache get, well, cache set. So the tags are here. So if I added a new template in my theme, I would probably do that. I would invalidate the theme registry. If the site is having issues with cache discovery not regenerating properly, you might just have too many things. I don't know why that would happen. I've never actually had this happen in Drupal 8. In Drupal 7, I had it happen all the time for people who had like 1,000 fields and were on Acquia with Memcache, because their cache was too big for Memcache to handle. So Memcache would like just try to shard up the data into like tinier chunks, and then it would never actually populate. So I guess that's a long-winded answer to say I don't know, but maybe try moving the cache into Redis if you can, instead of into the database table. But there's something bigger going wrong. So I would just try to find ways that you can mitigate having to run cache rebuild in production by doing, cache invalidation on deploy via like hook. So all these would be done in hook post update. Is when you would run these cache invalidations and rebuilding of things. So that way you can have a safe deployment and a performant deployment that doesn't require rebuilding all the caches and all of your page cache and everything else. So sorry, I don't know why that would happen. I've never had to put it in maintenance mode, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's due to having way too many contrib or too many fields or too many like plugin definitions, and it's just I don't know. It's one that you don't know until you like really look at it. So we're gonna go for releases, and we know we want certain values. So what I'm actually going to do is we'll have releases be array map. We know it's a node, so we'll call it a node, and we'll pass it the data list, and we'll do return. We're gonna do. It's going to go back to the issue. So I did say we'll capture all of these. So we'll say version is node version. We'll say major is node field release version major minor. We'll copy the name there. And patch. Extra. Let's see. So, and then we'll get the VCS label, which is usually, oh yeah, actually it is different. Sorry. So the release version here is 92x-dev, but the VCS label is 9.2x. So we'll capture that just in case that's something that's useful. And we'll check insecure. And insecure would be doesn't really make it very easy. So insecure, we'll leave empty for right now. Or no, we won't. Let's see. So we'll say in array. What was it? If in array and array map terms turn, sorry, not terms, term ID from node taxonomy. Just copy it. All right. I'll add true for strict checking. And I have my debugging point just in case. All right. So what this does is we go through the releases and we just map it to the data we need, and we're going to flag insecure if our term ID exists, the 1888131. So let's run this command again and see where we end up. Now, I know I went nuts and did like an array map and then another array map inside of it. We could just do a for each, but I've been in JavaScript land and used to running a lot of nested array maps. So that's just my thing right now. So that's marked. So it looks like we've got thing going, but why would it be, why would 9.1. Okay. So it's ordered. So by passing the, let's see, that's ordered odd. So it looks like by passing sort field release version minor, that's not great. So let's look back at this in here. Probably what's better is to sort by the create a date. So let's do that. We'll do sort by, oh, not in here. Change it here. Sorted by created date. Yeah, descending, we want oldest first. So let's rerun that again and see if that gives us better results. So we have to do less processing on the end to reorder things. We just skip that breakpoint, go right to here. Uh-oh, 500 error. Oh, because I pasted, I did not, I pasted the timestamp and not the field name. So I will run that again. And then once we get this, I'll create the table that will dump all this into. All right, so releases. I guess, wait, 9.0.1. This feels even more awkward by sorting by the created date. What do we got here? Let's look at the data. Created, changed. I just want to compare something real quick. Created on Jan 20. Oh, wait, because that's right. That does make sense because 9.0 is still supported alongside of 9.1. Yep, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. So we got that in a decent order. We'll just keep it like that. So then what we would do is for each releases as release, say this database. We'll do a merge. So that way we don't have to do a lookup and so otherwise we would have to do a lookup and see if it exists. And if it exists, update. Otherwise, insert merge kind of takes care of all that. And we'll call it simply test core versions. And I don't remember how to do this off the top of my head, so I'm going to do search. Where else it's been done. Just copy that quick. So when you do a merge, you also want your keys to match the fields for the most part. So we'll call the fields are the release. Right? If it's an array of fields or an associative array of fields and values, the keys are taken to be the fields and the values are taken to be the values to insert. Okay, so we want our keys though to be because we'll want a unique entry, I guess, just on version. I guess we could just have the version be the unique key because everything else is derived from that. So maybe we don't need to have a very big combined one. So this is going to error if we run it because this table doesn't exist. So now we will go and create that. So simply test projects.install. When defining database tables in Drupal, they go into the the .install file. Database schema has not moved to some kind of like plugin or annotation based system. It is just like it was back in the Drupal prior days. I just want to copy this just so we have the boilerplate documentation. So if we do function, simply test projects does not do the autocomplete here. For hooks, I'm actually going to keep this open because it has been a while since I've defined a schema. So I'm going to split and move it right so that way I have something I can reference. Our schema, return the schema. We called the table name this. So we'll give it a description. Cache, Drupal core releases. Got the fields. Primary key. We know the primary key will be this version. So fields. Description, display label of the release, type. We'll call it that. We'll just give it the length of 255, not null. It's true. And we'll just basically copy this for, we're going to move this to the other group as well. We got major. I guess like we could technically do optimization and know that major is like one or two characters. Same with minor and patch, but we can decide to do that later. Because from my understanding, when you choose variable character, you can say its length is 255, but it is a dynamic storage allocation, at least in MySQL. I don't know about all the others. So, and we're using a CMS and not managing our database directly, so there's tons of things that are not optimized in terms of space, but we will make sure to have an index on here to make it faster to search from. Patch. So extra can be null because it may not have extra version identifier. And we have the VCS label. Which is the get branch tag. And then we have insecure, which is a Boolean. And that one we can do properly. So we'll call this insecure type. Oh, what's something that has a schema that we can borrow from? Better question is, why didn't this register as a hook? But this did. Hook schema, I don't know. Okay. Status. Status is anything with a status. Shortcut. Nope. Node. Grant view. Boolean. Okay. We'll just copy that from there because we know that represents a Boolean. And then we'll adjust. Release is insecure. 0. Perfect. But what we want to do now is we want to create some indexes on here. So that way when we do our queries, things are faster. So we'll call this the major version, which will have an index just on major. So when we do a query that says select blah from simply test core versions by major version, it will be faster. And I think we'll probably want to include the insecure field on it because we'll be searching by insecure and not insecure as well. And then we can add indexes as we go. Yeah, I think that's it. It's kind of hard planning ahead of time for that. So now we have this here, but we need to write an update hook. Call implements hook schema. And inside your .install files is where you're supposed to put any functions that manipulate the database state. Simply test projects, update, and since we're in Drupal 9, I'll say 9.0.0.0.1. Load. There's a way to do this, and I cannot recall it off the top of my head for adding a new table name. We'll see if I can figure it out. So I do know that we do database schema. So you create a table. Oh, okay. So we would do core. Let's call this the DB schema. Call this our schema, which is when we call this function here. So DB schema create table. This is the table name, and it is that there. And we'll say that this installs the table. I want to check something quick. We're going to disable xdebug. Let's see if I set up the database or not. So again, one reason that I do like using PHP Storm is the database. Well, any IntelliJ product has the database browser in it, so you don't need to have SQL Pro or MySQL Workbench, any of those available. By doing ddev describe, I'm able to get the port mapping, and then I can create my data source for MariaDB. And localhost, I changed the port to be the port mapping ddev told me. The default ddev database is just all db, db, db. I click test connection, and I'm in. Perfect. Now let me just make sure I turned off ddev xdebug off. Just want to turn off xdebug while I run these updates. So I open the database because I want to just review what's going on here and then run the update, and we should have our table. I just want to make sure that the table is there. So if we do ddev drush updb, we should see our hook to, or our update hook to install our schema, and then I can refresh. I'll be able to refresh this, and we will see the table exists, and then it can go back to ensuring that this is populated. Oh, geez, come on. All right. So, yep, the hook is there. We'll click yes, and hopefully nothing explodes. So I think that's all that needs to be done is to call create table. Boom. Okay, I refreshed it. We now see simply test core versions. And just to review our schema, we defined version, major, minor, and secure. We have the primary key on version, and we have an index called major version that's on major and insecure. So that way, when we query for major version and specify the insecure value, we have a bit faster of a select query. Cool. Let's get back into our container. Now that we have this here, actually I want to keep that open. And what we'll do is we'll just run this. I'm not even going to turn on Xdebug again. We'll just see what happens. So if I double click our table, it will query cannot be null. Oh, I didn't. Shoot. Well, since we're local, I'm going to delete that. I thought I set that to false. I guess not. So since we didn't deploy this yet, I'm going to modify the column and turn off not null. Click execute. And see now that we have the little dot gone, it's not required. I wanted to say if you haven't used the database tooling here, the JetBrains toolbox is kind of covered up by the chat on the live stream, but there is DataGrip, which is essentially their database workbench as a standalone IDE. I use that a lot when working with standalone databases to just do a few things. I found that I like it a lot better than MySQL Pro or whatever is like the Mac OS client that everyone uses. All right, so we've made this not required, or we allow a null version for extra. Let's rerun our command. Oop. I have a feeling it might error on invalid integer value for insecure. So what we'll try now is we'll go back to our process and we will cast that to a Boolean, which I don't understand why it didn't. Or I guess, no, I shouldn't have casted it to an integer. I should have casted it to a Boolean. I should cast it to an integer because then true is 1 and false is 0. And then it makes the database happy. Patch cannot be null. False, but not everything is a patch release. So this is why it's always good to test this stuff locally before you just deploy it to a production site. Because let's say I wrote on this and I was like, hey, let's deploy it to dev and give it a try out. And then our database would be a hot mess because I wrote some trues when they should have been false. All right, so it ran. Let's reopen the table. And we now have a bunch of releases. I don't think we need to worry about when they're created, because what we can do is, I should have added an index to minor, possibly. We can decide how to optimize the database later. Because what we would do then is we can do select from core versions, order by major, and that would go. So then we can get our ordering pretty much on point. Although it's odd that, no, maybe I just don't know how to write SQL either. But we could be able to sort by the major version and then the minor version and get them in an order. So let's run this now against Drupal 8. And I think this is where we'll need to add some pagination to a few things because we wouldn't get all of the core versions. Yeah, we've only got yeah. Okay, so let's turn back on Xdebug and look at what's going on when running for 8. So we'll do enable Xdebug. Got that back on. Turn on the debugger and we'll stop here. Actually, we'll stop. We'll go right there too. So I'm going to run the command against 8. So has next page is true. So we've got 50 releases in here, which makes sense. There's 30 releases for Drupal 9, 50 from this first page. That's 80. That's how many rows we had. We now need to add pagination to this. So now we're going to refactor this a bit to where we actually do, where we add this current array as an array here. We're going to say releases equals array merge releases. So what this will let us do is loop over every result and just keep appending it to this release. And then by running this array merge, it will squash it back down into a single array. So what we'll do is we'll call has next page, or we'll say current page equals 0. And we'll say has next page equals true. Let's say while has next page we'll put this has next release or has next page here, and we'll change shoot, let's get back to the scratch so I can make sure we'll change this to 8. We'll run the request. And we'll look at this. So self is here. Okay, if we append page, so it's and page 0 is the first. So we're going to take this current page and we're going to actually add it here. So we'll say and, what was it now? I even forgot, page. So and page equals current page. So while we have a next page, it will take the current page number, fetch it, and then at the end of it, we will say has next page, and we'll do current page plus plus. There's tons of ways to do pagination in an API. For example, there is in here, we have next, so we could keep following the next, but we're just going to do this to start. It's a little bit easier to get it started in a cleaner loop. So we'll give this a try now. So we're going to do a while loop that checks if we have a next page, convert this to uppercase to meet Drupalisms. The URL takes the major version and the current page number and is going to loop over the response and keep appending it to the releases and then combine all of those. Releases equals array. We need to make sure that there's an initial. All right, so let's give this a shot. So while has next page, we'll get the response. Okay. So current page plus plus has next page is true. The URL is now page 1. And we're going to keep on going. Oop. So what I'm going to do is just click play. So we break here, and it's going to paginate through the API. So if we get here, we can see that since there's 5 groups, that means that there was 5 pages. All have 50. Seems miraculous that it's that even. But I guess so. We're nearly close enough. So if we hit play again, we now have all of those inserted into our database table. And voila. We now have all of the Drupal 8 and Drupal 9 releases in there. I will turn off Xdebug real quick. Disable Xdebug. And we'll fetch Drupal 7. And a lot of times what I'll do in client sites is I'll actually use the state to leave off like what page I was on. So if there's an error or if I want to do like throttling, it will say start at where I last left off, or whenever there's an error, say, hey, this is where we left off. Next time we try again. Minor cannot be null. Oh, that's right, because there's no minor releases in Drupal 7. So we're just going to change it to be 0 for Drupal 7 if it doesn't exist, just to make it consistent. Oh, there we go. It got all of Drupal 7 already. Cool. So we now have the data locally. The next step is to make use of this. So we've got the fetcher for its horrible naming. Now we want to add an API endpoint that allows reading from here. Autocomplete projects, project versions. These all existed beforehand, but we're going to create a new one that's called public function core versions. We're going to pass in the request object. So one note I wanted to make here in this, so in your controller methods, the request is always passed. Up here, I noticed that they injected, whoever first wrote this code injected the request stack to get the current request. That's always passed whenever the controller is handled. Is the database injected yet? No, it is not. So we will add the database here. Just to make sure everybody's familiar with, part of the dependency injection bit. When things have implement the interface container injection interface, core will say like, oh, it implements this. We'll invoke this create method with the container so it can quote unquote build itself. So we're going to add our new dependency, which is the database. And PHP Storm's arguing at me because that's not something that's defined here. So we'll add it. And just, like the class name, the abstract class is called connection. And so are all the like concrete classes, and it's called connection and database interchangeably. Like even in core, sometimes it's called the database as a property method. Other times it's called connection. I flip back and forth 5,000 times. The service is called database. The class is called connection. So we'll call this database equals connection. Add the property. Database. And update the PHP documentation. The project fetcher. Call this the database connection. All right. So request here. So we're going to say, actually, we won't have any, we'll say string So to start, we'll just do it the string major version. We're not going to use the request because we're not going to fetch it as a query parameter. We'll make it a route parameter. So the database table name is, usually too, I'll put this name in a constant. I'm actually going to do that now. Public const table name, that there, and we'll use that constant throughout here now. So that way we don't have to worry about copying around because I have horrible memory. And I always have to look things back up. So that's why I like using constants. Let's do self table name. Perfect. So here we will do query equals this database select. We'll do query condition. And the condition is the major version equals major version. And we'll decide this later, but we're going to say that insecure must be 0. We're going to filter out all insecure releases. We'll say results equals query fetch. Oh, sorry. Execute fetch all. We'll do now. It's important here that you do fetch all because earlier this week I did a database query which just did fetch, which gives you the first item. And that typo caused me 2 days of wondering why my code didn't work because I failed to realize that I did fetch instead of fetch all. So never feel bad about yourself because I wasted so much time because of that typo. All right, so now we're going to add this route and hopefully have enough time to get this into the front end because I realize it's now going on an hour and a half. So simply test projects.core versions path. We'll just keep some of the naming up. Actually, we'll see what I did for, no, we'll just, yeah. Launch, I redid some route names in here. They are really just simple. So we'll just say simply test core versions. I named the parameter major version. We'll do defaults controller. I'll do a, where's copy special copy reference. So copy reference gives me the namespace and the 2 colons and the method name. And I'm going to copy some more from here where we do this, but we're going to remove the permission and it's just access true. So format JSON, that's going to force anything we return to come back as JSON. And we could just do or no, we'll just do new. We're going to do new cacheable JSON response with the results data. Actually, we'll do one thing. Return response. We'll do response get cacheable metadata, add cache tags of core versions. So we're going to make sure that this response is cacheable by page cache, and we're going to give it this cache tag. And really rudimentarily, we're going to do cache tag, and we're going to make a cardinality on the major version. And what we'll do in our fetcher here is after we do inserts, we'll say cache invalidate tags version. So whenever this command runs, it will invalidate the cache tags for the core versions of that version, which would invalidate this response, but it's cached and will be returned by page cache. So we'll do that. We're going to do drush cr so we can get this route, and we'll try getting back to core versions. Oh, line 47. What did I... Oh, I forgot to import the class. Unexpected connection. I did something wrong. Oh. PHP Storm wanted to add the in 7.4 it allows adding you can type hint your properties, but I have ddev on 7.3. So I'm going to change the language level back so that stops happening and run the cache clear again. So my goal before I wrap up is to try to get this plugged into the React front end. And I'm hoping to do that within the next 30 minutes because I want to tie this off so I can go shovel from our snowstorm. We've got 8 inches of snow overnight and it's still coming down. And I'm going to have to spend the rest of my day taking care of that. Okay, cache is rebuilt. Let's copy that URL. And we will see what returns. Oh. Near from simply test core versions. Well, that's... So how is that an error? All right. Condition major, insecure. All right. Condition major, major version, condition insecure. Syntax near from major equals. Oh, wait a second. Maybe that came in bad. So let's make sure that xdebug is on. I was hoping this would just work. I wouldn't need to xdebug it, but let's see. Major version is 9. Query. Simply test core right? Yeah. That's the right table name. Major at line 3. Let's try dropping that, the insecure. I don't know why. Oh, what the heck? Select from simply test core version, simply core where major is 9. Why? Well, I don't even know. So if I go into execute, union is prepared. Arguments. Placeholder. No. What in the world? All right. I'm going to try running it. Simply oh, I've done this so many times before, and so you need to request fields. That would help, because if you don't request fields, then it's a broken query. Too few arguments past the table alias. We want, there is no alias. We'll just copy this. Oh. Yeah, so if you don't pass fields to return, it's going to error out on you. And let's see what we get for a response. And we get the responses here. We'll want to, yeah, I think the front end does the grouping right now, so we can work with that. We'll want to do though, I wish we could get these two type int over, but whatever, we can, that's a problem for another day. All right, so let's see if we can get the front end to work with this quick before I have to call it. So let's commit this as we have it right now for this issue. So we've now added all the backend components. Let's go through it. We've got the composer.json for Drush. We've got the command. We've got the install hook for the schema and the update to install it. We've got the new route. We've got the new service, the commands, the controller, and the ill-named version fetcher. Work for maintaining a local cache of core versions. All right. My mouse disappeared. Okay, we'll commit and push that. Let's move on to the front end. So the front end lives in the theme. And before we launch it, we'll just start with trying to remember where I set that up. This is not cleaned up yet. It's a very large file that just has everything kind of clumped together. Okay, API URL. Perfect. So we want to change all this to how am I calling it elsewhere? How do I just do that? Okay. So we copy this path, change the API URL to be, we will Drupal major. Now remove that to do. Set Drupal versions. Oh, this is where it's going to be all kinds of broken. So we'll see how much we can fix before launching it up. So it gives the first release. So first, it's just the entire. Actually, that response is bad. I'm going to change that response because you should never return JSON as a root array. There's reasons somewhere. JSON always object. There's like some kind of security thing where you want to always return an array or return an object that wraps the array. I'm sure that you can find an article somewhere on it. So we will call this, we'll call it list, just like core has. So if I refresh, I have my caches turned off locally, so it automatically reloads. So now we have it as list. So we don't need to do the .map anymore. Or we do, sorry, map release to version. And this has us picking the first version, which we know is not the latest, but we can to do. The first is not the current version of core. Let's do that, but let's see if we can fix that real quick. Since I couldn't do it before, so we'll do order by major descending, order by minor descending, and we'll do order by patch descending, and we'll see what that gets us. 9.1, 9.2 doesn't have any releases yet, so I think that gets us there. To do review if we, so I wonder by doing all these, I know you put indexes for querying and filtering, but I wonder if we should make an index for just this due to the order by. So patch is null. So what we'll do is I'm going to adjust the front end because I have a feeling that the first entry will always be the latest dev since patch is null. So we will always take the second entry in the list. And the second entry should always be the last stable, which if we go to project Drupal, once it loads, we should see that 9.3 is the most correct, and we're at 9.2.x.dev. All right, so that seems to work out fairly well. So let's get it started. Let's see if I broke it all or not, or if this just magically worked. So let's do. We'll just do build. And then for those who didn't tune in last time, so this is using, let's see. So the React, it's using a React front end and Laravel mix. So there is no Webpack configuration for the theme, the styling and whatnot, but it is using Laravel mix to manage Webpack and ties in and does the compiling of the React app and some post CSS stuff for Tailwind, along with purging unused classes, a few things like that. So that's what the run production is doing. All right, we have it generated. Let's see. Wait for the home page to load. Okay. Oh, because I tested that patch. 1 second. I've got to give back access since that patch didn't merge yet. Disable xdebug. We'll do drush CIM. All right, there we go. I'm hopeful that this will work because there wasn't too much being managed. I mean, the entire thing needs to be the JavaScript needs a lot of rework, but this part didn't require too much rework. So I should now get access to the page. All right. Let's open the DOM inspector and watch the network. So if I type password policy versions 9, we got, oh, look at that. We got the using the cacheable JSON. That only took, how fast was that? 175 milliseconds. So that's nice. That's a lot faster than it was going out to Drupal core. It fetched Drupal 9 because that wasn't a valid version here. That is something that has to be fixed. But let's change this to 8. It's going to fetch the 8 versions. We got that back in 90 milliseconds. I love it. And it gave us, so I guess that's a bug there. Because it gave us 8.9. 8.9 wasn't at the top of the list. I wonder if there was like 8.10 that would have shown up. So there's some quirks there that need to be worked through. There's not a one that targets Drupal 9. There's a lot of work we have to do too on saying like, hey, 8.x is actually compatible with Drupal 9, so show it as an option. And also, not showing older minor versions. But this seems to do it. I'm going to click Launch Sandbox. Launch project. It sent the right version. That's nice. That just works. And that's a huge performance improvement compared to when it would take 2 seconds to load from the Drupal.org API. So I already ran the build. I'm going to run it again for safe measure since I don't have this Husky added yet. We've got all this going on and building. Awesome. That'll be a huge UX improvement and help building the UI because it'll be a lot faster. And one of the goals that we'll do too is by having all of these versions, we can do better version compatibility when leveraging this simple test project. So versions right now is a serialized array. We'll probably have to change that and we'll be able to do better mapping to know what compatibility things have, or be able to look up that, oh, we're using Drupal core and it's well, that's a bad example. You were using COD and COD has these things. There are a lot of projects in here. But the point is that now we'll have all of that metadata available and we can check what their versions are comparable with and have basically rebuilding what Composer does into a UI for building projects. Okay. Let's double check my diffs. I'm really excited about this. Like, that is a huge performance win. Oh. Just double check that. Not going to try to look at that diff. And this adds there. Adjust the front end to receive new endpoint. Do a commit and push. And pump this needs review. Is working. Before the Drupal.org API request took about 2 seconds on a cold, we'll say cache miss, much faster on hit, but the cache lifetime was 15 minutes. This approach was showing requests at 90 with Drupal caching turned off. So those requests were being served without page cache too. That was just boom, returning a request response from the controller, the Drupal render pipeline avoided, and set. So that's really exciting. So it looks like we'll be able to wrap this up at the top of the hour. I'm going to open the merge request here. Thank you all for joining in. If you would like to contribute to the Simply Test development, like I said, I'm working on a template that's available at mglomman/simplytestme. This gives you a composer install with all the goodies so you can get running. This is how I run my local development. Like as we saw config changes, that's what this is right here, which I'll commit that as well to make the change. Right now I'm trying to get GitHub Actions to run. If you don't have the ability to contribute code, there is an open collective for Simply Test Me that allows you to do donations or sponsor development. The initial push for this was paid for through the open collective throughout December and January. I'm doing this now on sponsored time, or my own sponsored time through Bluehorn Digital, my company, because I really want to see Simply Test get over this hurdle and ease the maintenance burden put on Adam for having to maintain 2 different systems. So thanks for tuning in. Hope you learned something new, and we're excited by the upcoming Simply Test Me changes. Have a good one.